everyone, and welcome to the Seat and Costs, where I talk to open source founders and builders about what really goes into the commercial part of running a commercial open source business. I'm your host, Ben Romech. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Right, this is a very surreal moment because today, sat in front of me, I have, the man whose idea this podcast was originally, Matt Althauser, and his one of his business partners, Alex Boswell from Polychrome. So, Matt and Alex, this is surreal. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks,
for having
Ben.
me. Great to be a guest on the pod.
So we're going to talk today a little bit about monetization and how, really the C in costs in the commercial open source software. So just before we start, I think it would probably be super relevant for you guys to give a super quick background about Polychrome and the Polychrome companies that you've been working with and investing in, and just a little bit about yourself. So Matt.
Yeah, for sure. So Polychrome is a holding company where we invest into and partner with technical founders. We like to own companies really with no goal of selling them. So we want long-term partnerships. We have 5 businesses that we work with today, and we're always looking for more. The company was started by Alex, myself, and our other co-founder, Greg. And all of us are ex-venture-backed go-to-market and finance executives who really love the earliest stages of business building. That's our background for Polychrome. And then my background, I've been working at companies like Optimizely and Amplitude in the venture-backed space before starting Polychrome.
Yeah, so similar to Matt, spent the first part of my career working in venture-backed companies. Prior to starting Polychrome, I spent a little over 7 years at Twilio, working in finance and operations roles there. And when Greg and Matt and I got together to start Polychrome, we just really wanted to bring that experience to kind of a smaller scale software companies that are growing and kind of help be the other side of technical founders and building companies. And we found ourselves pretty quickly with you and with Flagsmith discovering and understanding about the open source ecosystem and building open source companies and then commercializing that.
So what I wanted to talk about today, it feels like the big 3, in my head anyway, the 3 sort of life cycle phases or metamorphosizations of Flagsmith really were us getting to an annual recurring revenue of $10,000 and then $100,000 and then $1 million. I do feel in my head like, I know there's obviously, they're nice round numbers, but there was definitely massive shifts in how the business was being run and the direction it was being taken. So just really briefly for people who don't know, and then maybe you guys can talk a little bit about some of the other Polychrome portfolio companies, how they got to that first 10K. It's a kind of an elusive number because that's what is that, $800 a month, right? Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really, really, really hard, right? Like it's really hard. And there's an interesting story that we can talk a little bit about with Flagsmith because I like to think that we made a bit of a mistake getting our first $10,000 because we didn't put really any thought into who our long-term target customer was going to be, right? We were just like, build an open source project that we would like to use ourselves, put it on GitHub, and then, point 3 is ... and then profit. And for us, the ... which we made no effort in, doing any customer development or even any, research really, was build a SaaS platform. And so instead of people having to self-host it, they could pay us to host it. And that is not our main source of revenue for Flagsmith now, which we can come on to. Getting people to pay $29 a month for a hosted platform, like a feature flagging platform, when you have no customers, right? When you have an MRR of 0, getting to sell $29 is much, much easier than selling a $40,000 enterprise license, right? And so looking back on it and thinking about this discussion now, maybe that's worked really well for us. Like it wasn't, we sort of fell into that. It wasn't the right thing to kind of pivot around subsequently. But for our first 10K in ARR, it was something that was achievable. And, you go from like $29, then you get another one or two, then you might sell it. We had a larger license at the time. I can't remember how much it was, maybe $100 or $150, and then you only need to sell a handful of those and you're at 10K. And then you're sort of starting to think, all right, this is paying for a little bit more than the servers and stuff like that. So how did some of the other Polychrome companies get to that mark?
Yeah, for sure. I think we actually asked every founder we've worked with so far, and we talked to a bunch of founders, especially in the open source space, like how did you come up with the original idea and original customers? And so many of them are actually comments in GitHubs from like it's shocking amount of companies get started that way. And it's like if you go into your favorite open source community right now and you see like the most upvoted problem that the company hasn't solved themselves, like it might be like not the worst place to consider solving pain for people. An upvote is a form of raising your hand. But I would say like the first step is really choosing a real problem to solve that is worth money. And I think the beautiful thing for engineers is that you live hopefully within that community. You understand that pain point, what it's worth to you. And that's motivated you to ship the original product. So I remember Kyle, your co-founder, Ben, he was like, there was something about...
there was a GitHub issue on the Firebase,
that's right.
One of the Firebase open source repositories. And and you're right, he had like 45 upvotes or something. Actually, we'll see if we can link them in the show notes. But and people say the same thing about there's a bunch of like very large or companies that have been very successful that have been started off either Hacker News posts or Hacker News comments where there's just been a bunch of activity around them, right?
Yeah, and at least it's like enough to get you started on like the right problem. Now there's like this huge trough of sorrow between like I saw this problem on GitHub and I actually shipped something that people can do. And so I think for you guys, having the agency as a stable business really it allows you guys to be camels in the desert. And so I don't mean to undermine or oversimplify that for the founders that don't have that steady source of income. That's really tough. But I do think that if you can pick a problem that is real and solve it effectively with software and be patient and continually let people know in the community that you solved that problem, that's a pretty good way to get to that initial 10K. Another way that we've seen people do it effectively outside of solving a community problem is creating a community and then understanding that community and solving problems for it. There's, I know like the DevTools podcast guy, he's built an amazing community around DevTools. Like, I'm not surprised if he builds something off the back of that. We have similar opportunities here just through the connections that we've built with this podcast. So like there's ways that you could also say, hey, I can build the community and then solve problems, or I can attack an existing community and solve a real problem for them. So I'd say that's tends to be like the best way, at least with DevTool or open source type products that we see.
Cool. Alex, are there any companies that you spring to mind that are relevant in terms of their journey to 10K?
I think that, like Matt said, I think the key thing is that everyone has a story of why they started the company. You and Kyle put a lot of thought into why feature flags. And then we look at Joel with Browserless. He had basically been doing browser automation at his previous company. So he knew the problem. He knew exactly what sucked about it and what to go solve. So you probably hear that a lot, but it's not necessarily solving your own problem, but it's really understanding why that's a problem and going after it.
Is it? Yeah. Just to add to that, I'm sort of very cynical of myself, and Kyle is very much the opposite. And so if I was having a problem, I'd kind of be sat there probably thinking like, I'm the only person who's ever had this problem because, I don't know, like imposter syndrome or whatever. But Kyle would be like, no, this is like, there's going to be millions of people that have this problem, right? Like, and sometimes you do have to take that, to sort of take that leap. I mean, there is, let's be clear, there is a lot luck plays a big part at this point in the journey, right? Like, and yeah, like you said, Matt, like having an agency meant, we could fire off several shots and we didn't have to, go and live in our car or do anything like that. Like, it took time, but being able to, being able to iterate that loop quickly, build something quickly, and then be able to say to yourself, this isn't working, you need to go on to the next one, and then avoid that sunk fallacy cost. The other thing I'd like to say at this point, when you're like zero sales, if you put a website out there and you have a decent like marketing stance that is above a certain level of good, no one knows you have $0 in sales, right? Like, and it's amazing the number of people who don't ask how many dollars in sales you've got, right? Like, when was the last time you asked a supplier, how big are you? And that always, I mean, imposter syndrome, but that always amazed me. And I'd be like, they're just going to assume that we have $0 in sales. But as long as your website's okay, then no one's going to know, right? And that's so many people make that mistake, I think.
No, it's true. I mean, putting lipstick on before you go out is always a good idea. Right? So, yeah, and I think like it's so funny, like, the open source community makes all this big deal about stars, but I totally remember when we got to 1,000 stars, we were like, wow, it's one at least symbol that we're somewhat legitimate. So there's other things that you can do to try to show progress as well and adoption. I'm not saying that that's the best one, but yeah, it's interesting. In fact, I would say 4 of our 5 companies that we work with all solved community-driven problems that led to the founding of their product, which is really cool. Two of the 4 were agencies that spun products out. So you guys and Marker.io.
Yep.
And then 2 were deep in a community, right? So Terra Team was actually in a part of the Open Tofu fork, which led them to build a cloud offering for that community. So yeah, it's like totally from this community is where we see like the best companies get born.
I think maybe another episode might be an interesting thing to dive into that as well, because you also, if you do that, you do have to be super, super careful and calibrated about your approach, right? Because, and understandably, as engineers especially, because it gets sold to so much, and there's been projects that have kind of done a bit of a rug pull on their communities. I do think you have to be calibrated about that and respectful of that. But everyone knows like it, it's like, it when you see it, right? Like, yeah. Okay. So, let's talk a bit. So getting from 10 to 100K. Now, this is the point in Flagsmith's life where, I met you guys, and that was, that was that was a very important, timely introduction, because just to set the scene, we had, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it would have been like, maybe $30,000 in ARR at the time, maybe a little bit less, and we were starting to get approached by very large enterprise organizations who wanted to run the platform on premise, and we hit this big problem that you guys knew the answer to, or you knew some of the answers to, which was, how much do you sell an on-premise license for what is 98% free open source software, right? And that's a very, very difficult question to answer. Almost impossible if you've not got much experience of it. But if you do have experience of it, then away you go. So how do you remember that sort of period?
Well, it was funny to me because I remember we had massive organizations sending support questions in.
Right.
Where you're like, wait a minute, they're on the support channel, but they're from the biggest company like I've ever seen in the world. And then I remember asking some really basic questions because as a non-technical person, I don't know about you, Alex, but like I've never worked previously on a company that sold on-premises licenses. It was all cloud that we had sold, all closed source that we had sold previously. Alex, was that the case for you as well?
Yeah.
So for me, I was just like trying to ask these obvious questions like, okay, so like, wait, so they can just like Docker up like our product and get up and running? And Ben's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, but like, I don't understand. Like they need our support, right? Yeah, they need our support. Okay. So there's like this willingness to use our product and pay, and I just couldn't put together why that wasn't our target customer. And I think like at the time, it was just that like one, I don't think it was like super popular at the time to build software companies that focused on an on-premise delivery model as well as a cloud delivery model. I think it was less popular. It's become over the last 5 years. But it just was like glaring kind of to all of us when we started asking the basic questions like, could we build a company where this didn't suck for customers? There's always reasons why different modes of infrastructure are terrible for customers or companies to support. But I remember pretty early just being like, oh, but what if we make it in a way that's really cool for our customers and it works well and the upgrades are easy and we make the infrastructure bulletproof? And I think that ethos really like led to just a lot of how you guys think about building product. And who we build it for. So I always think like if the first rule is choose a problem to solve that's worth money, the second is now choose a subset of those users that want the problem solved, that are actually worth, a lot more as a customer. And that helps you get to the next level a little bit faster, right? So that can be based on seats, it can be based on tokens now or units or whatever people are saying today for the newest pricing model. But I think doubling down on an area, was pretty obvious to us at the time, just to keep asking questions.
Then Alex, I remember coming from an agency where you do a month's work and then you send them an invoice and then they ignore your invoice for like 3 months and then you moan at them and then they pay it. We've gone from that to a company's like asking you, instead of for a year's invoice up front, for like 2 or 3 years invoices up front, right? Because they want to, the single most important thing that they're trying to do is to de-risk the acquisition of that software license and to not have any bumps in the road for that 3 years, right? Like, can you talk to that a little bit about when those people that are doing, but the people buying that software, like you've had a lot of experience of working with them and what their kind of needs are, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in starting a company, it's great that you're aligned with the customer in that way, right? They're like, hey, we want to pay 2-3 years up front, or you're able to get them to pay 2 or 3 years up front for a discount. And on the same side, like that was the fuel we needed to keep building the business and keep running the business. So super well aligned. But that kind of comes to the whole pricing of these deals. And you're like, when you're dealing with enterprise customers and you haven't spent a lot of time with enterprise customers, how do you price? And we were kind of learning that as we went. I think Matt and Greg both had great experience having sold and priced tons of enterprise customers on the SaaS side. But then when we started thinking about on-prem, it was kind of a new model, right? You had the old, you sell a perpetual license with 15 to 20% support on top. And that's kind of gone now, and it's more of an actual recurring license that includes support and includes everything. And then it's just a matter of figuring out what the willingness to pay from customers is. And that's really the sales process, and that's discovery, and you get into that in those deals.
Just one other thing that I want to cover from you at this, because I remember at this point, so to set the scene, we've got a positive cash flow cycle. So we're getting people paying us for work that we haven't done yet, right? Which is really good. But there's a bit of a it's a bit of a Faustian pact that you have to sort of agree with yourself, because I remember sort of thinking, oh man, we've got this money in the bank, right? Let's go and hire some more engineers and hire some more go-to-market people. And you were like, no, we haven't earned that money yet, right? It's sat in our bank, but we haven't earned it yet. And that was definitely the right thing to do. But just how did you sort of like, what did you have some sort of guiding principles in terms of, because the problem is if you're always making sales, right, then that number's, that cake is growing in front of you, and you're like, I want to go and eat that cake. We'll hire more people. But at some point it does make logical and rational sense to dig into a little bit of that if you can see. But can you talk a little bit about how you sort of went around the numbers and the the sort of the metrics around that?
Yeah, definitely. So that was a core thing for us with Flagsmith, with any company that we work with, is we want to build a very sustainable like business that can live off its own profits and be long-term profitable and ongoing business. So you don't want to get too risky and start to use all that upfront cash. But the way that we looked at it was we initially wanted to use some of that upfront cash that we got to do one-off projects that we knew were important, paying for things like the new website, things like that we could pay for without that weren't going to be recurring costs.
Right. Right.
And at the same time, keeping enough money in the bank to make sure that we could support that customer for the long term and that we weren't burning through it right away and running out of money. As you grow as a business and those upfront payments and enterprise sales become more repeatable and more dependable, you can start to use some of that free cash flow a little bit more because you know you're going to sign 3 more deals the next month or 5 more deals or whatever. But when we were signing one every 6 months,
right,
we didn't know that there was going to be another cash influx. So you can't use that money. Once we've gotten to a little bit bigger position, I like to think of, really wanting to cover a decent percentage of kind of the unearned revenue that we have out there, and also making sure that we have, 3 months, maybe even 6 months covered in terms of what the costs of running this business are going to be if we don't have a bunch of free cash flow coming in ahead of the business.
I think the non-recurrable is a super important part there, right? Because then if you do have a bad quarter or whatever, you can just be like, okay, we won't do another, I don't know, big marketing event or, and then just the other thing, I remember this happening quite a lot when we were at this phase of the company was, I don't know, there'll be some enterprise gizmo that a customer needed and we didn't have the gizmo. And then it's like, okay, look, if we build the, if in 2 months we'll have the gizmo, right? But can if you sign the contract, the gizmo will be there in 2 months, and that's like the perfect thing because you're building in enterprise value into your product. You're eventually going to get paid for it, and everyone's happy. But yeah, like and this is kind of like fundamental difference between a venture backed and a bootstrap company is. The last thing you want to do with a bootstrap business is go and hire people who suddenly make that collapse that runway. But yeah, like one-off things that's definitely super important, and they can even be quite chunky as well, right? If you know that, and you're getting to the the number of orders that are coming through and the number of sales that are coming through. Once they get over a certain number, they start to be fairly. They're not too erratic. The numbers become a little bit more stable. Okay, so we haven't really talked about team size here. So I mean, I remember we got to 100K in ARR. We're still like a tiny team, right? Like absolutely minuscule. But to get to a million. That takes you need to really start considering the team. And I remember I was like, if we can afford 10 people at Flagsmith, then we hire 9 engineers and a project manager, right? And that was well for Flagsmith anyway. That was not the right answer. So when we got to a headcount of 10, Flagsmith didn't look like 9 engineers, right, man?
No, for sure. I think people do underestimate the other roles that tend to be of high value, marketing, sales. We do put a lot of support, technical support. I think we also have like a pretty good ethos about making sure an engineer is responding to your questions on support side. So we do try to, not have too many non-technical people on the team at this point in time, and hopefully for a long time. But generally speaking, yeah, you got to even it out. You got to have people running the day-to-day and managing customers and renewals. There's a lot to be done there. So yeah, I think I mean, at 1 million in revenue, we were still. I still felt like we had day jobs at Flagsmith. So I
Yeah,
think,
no, you definitely did. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So we were still heavily involved and trying to make sure that as much as possible could go back into the engineering organization. But yeah, it takes a community to build a business, right? So totally.
I remember as well. Yeah, the my complete sort of blinkered vision of just build the product, build the product, build the product. We need more engineering, we need more engineering, and then we were hiring. I mean, we had two marketers like really quite early on, and I was thinking like, this isn't. It just was completely like, what the hell? But that seemed, now that's like so valuable, and the work that they do is so valuable to the business. But then the other thing as well is, being guarding against large customers churning and making sure that customers are like switched on after they've bought, after they've gone through the acquiring the license or the product. That again was something that I was kind of naive to as a role, and can be like, again, like if you're wanting to grow, not churning. If you've got a negative churn rate, then that's a superpower as well, and it was something that I was completely blind to as well. Like, do you want to, Alex? What sort of aspects of businesses at 1 million are you sort of thinking are most important?
Yeah, I mean, at 1 million, well, we are still engineering heavy organizations. So it's building the engineers. And then I think one of the best things at Flagsmith has been that we brought in technical support, but the engineering team did a ton of technical support early on, still does. So that was super important. But yeah, the next thing we did was we brought in an enterprise seller, someone that could really, work with these enterprises and build those relationships. And like you said, this is about getting new sales in the door, but it's also about expanding those contracts that we already have, because those are the easiest dollars that you're going to come by next. It's much easier to expand an enterprise, move into another department within that organization or something, than to sell a whole new enterprise, right? So having someone there, and then we did start to build the customer success or CS team. So people that were really following up, not just people that wanted to close new deals, but people that were having check-ins with enterprise customers and building that. So engineering heavy, and then kind of all those other things relate to supporting and closing new deals and bringing those in. Marketing was an early hire we made. That was important. And then I think early on, you do want to have an understanding of your financials and your metrics and how you're building the business against where you're going. So someone in the organization that can kind of take a hold of that and do your accounting metrics, financial forecasting, planning, things like that. Hopefully that's someone in the org that can do that with a portion of their time early on. But I think all that helped guide the company and make sure that we were, on a really on a path that had a lot of thought around it, and we weren't overextending ourselves anywhere.
One thing I think is really important about that is I think there was actually a lot of value in the fact that you were like only doing a small portion of your weekly work was on Flagsmith, and so you were a little bit detached from it emotionally in that way, right? Where it allowed you to sort of stand back a little bit and say, look, here are the numbers. We can afford to, I don't know, do this marketing thing, or we've got a budget for this, but not to get drawn into making decisions emotionally, because and not making them in a rational way. I think that's having someone who's a little bit detached, who's doing that side of things, I think worked really, really well for us. And I definitely felt, the benefit from that. Just finally, before we finish up, in terms of licensing, how do you feel that sort of affects everything that we're talking about here? Because different licenses can be, they can really steer where your product goes, how easy they are for people to contribute to, how easy they are for people to deploy on premise and things like that. Just what sort of thoughts have you got around sort of different licensing and different licensing models, and how that can affect a company's kind of life as it's growing?
Yeah, we kind of let's see, we started out with like the road to 10K here. How do you get to that first 10K? And that, I think at that point, you're kind of making the decision around what your monetization model is going to be. And there's been that evolution from the beginning where it was like support. And then we kind of started out with SaaS on top of that. And then Flagsmith moved to kind of your dual license or open core type model. And there's a lot of options within that. So in terms of what the actual license you want, you kind of choose based on that. So you want to pick the goals that you have around your business and how you're going to grow it, and choose the right license for that. So for example, if you have a more permissive license, you're going to probably have a quicker, you're going to get more contributions. You're going to get more people adopting it. I know we've talked to a lot of enterprise customers where they're only allowed to use open source software that has a few of these specific licenses. And you could say, oh, this other license is exactly the same. They're like, it's just not on the list. So I can only use it if it has MIT or Apache 2 or whatever the list that they have is. So I think picking, if you're going to go dual license, I think that's probably the model that's the best right now in terms of if you're trying to monetize open source with an on-prem side. If you do the SaaS, you could be more permissive. You don't need the dual license. But if you're doing a dual license, which is just, if anyone's like, it's having your open core license with a permissive license like MIT or Apache, and then having an enterprise license that's closed and you sell. And it just has a couple more features or security or whatever you decide is your differentiator between those. So I think choosing the license is important. And then if you have a tighter license, you might have more paths to commercialization and commercial success, but less people are going to adopt it early on. So you kind of have to make that choice. Flagsmith, a pretty permissive license for the open source, and then an enterprise license that people come talk to us about. I think that has worked really well. That's my recommendation most of the time. And I think that, like I said, that allows people to come and adopt it across the board and contribute and be interested, but then also gives you the path to building the business.
Matt, what are your thoughts?
No, I think the other part is, we came into the business to really support your vision, Ben. I think that that's really important about what our role was as a partner. And I remember we kept having conversations about licenses that were kind of almost like religion. And I remember we took a step back and being like, hey, what is everyone's ethos on open source? And then choosing a license that aligned to that ethos, so that, hey, we were going to benefit from community, but we weren't going to cross certain lines and break that trust over time. And that actually made for building go-to-market way easier. It's like, oh, there's not these variables moving around. For our community, they don't have to worry, like they can commit, and this is how we think about things. And so I really appreciated that you took the time to like share what your ethos was. And that made the company building and the monetization like frameworks, I think for Alex and myself, just like way easier. So I think as the founder, one thing I would say is as you start looking at licenses, really take a step back and think about like, why are you going open source? What would be painful for you as a person to kind of change or double cross that's against your standards? And no one's judging. You can have any standards. We're not religious about this at all, but I think that helps everyone around founders and around teams get on board and say, hey, this is the field. We got to optimize within it and let's get to work. And so that was a really helpful thing that you did for us.
I think just one final thing to add on that is, in my experience, most people that we've met on our travels, I'm not going to use the word journey, they unless you're egregious about the license, right? Unless you do something really, really, out of left field that's like, hang on a sec. Most people really, they're like, it's like they don't. it's like most people just drive cars, right? They're not car guys. They just want to get from one place to the other, and they don't care about the engine or the turbocharger or whatever. Open source, most people are the same, right? As long as it's roughly the right shape and size, and you're not doing anything absolutely wacky, then people tend really not to. Obviously, you will come across people from time to time who do that. But especially commercially as well, that happens very, very infrequently in a commercial setting, and so that's definitely been my experience about it. I know, historically, and especially with open source packages like standard libraries become very popular. Then it gets a lot more difficult, and it becomes a lot more emotional, and for good reason, because the guy in Nebraska, which we talk about almost every episode. But if you're building and selling an entire application or suite of tools that people can use and that can run themselves and use Docker and all that sort of stuff, people really, as long as you're doing something absolutely out of left field, then most people really don't mind, and it doesn't come up. So okay, cool. So we're trying to make these a little bit shorter and a little bit punchier. So if you've got any final closing thoughts, Matt?
I mean, the biggest one is thank you. Thanks for working with Polychrome. Thanks for letting us be on this journey with you. We've had
you can't say journey. You're not allowed.
Oh, sorry. Thanks for letting us be on this ride with you. We've learned just so much from you, and we're having a lot of fun still doing it. So thank you.
Awesome. Alex?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Ben. It's always great working with you. Final thoughts. I like this idea of what do you do to 10,000 ARR, 100,000 ARR, a million ARR. One thing, and Matt said it, and it's why I'm thinking it right now, is like, stay patient. It takes a long time, and it was never as fast, even when we thought things were going super well, but it's super fun, and you get to celebrate the wins and have a good time. So I hope that people kind of enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, that's a really important point, actually. Time and not. And that's it's one of the beauties about running a bootstrap company, right? It's like you're not under this constant time pressure grind, and you can just have the business run and build at a natural pace. Is really something that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's been one of the you're right, like. You'll have quarters or months that are amazing, and then you'll have quarters or months that will be like, oh my god. But yeah, the sort of combination accumulated gains that you can get is something that you just have to be really, really patient about. So cool. All right. Well, thanks again so much for your time, and we'll be posting some photos from a crazy Italian bike ride, hopefully in a couple of months.
We'll
have to do a blog post about it.
Ciao.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, cool. Cheers, guys.